By 1983, video games were the biggest thing in entertainment. Atari was a juggernaut, earning billions of dollars a year in revenue, and accounting for around 70% of Warner Communications' profits, far outstripping its film and music branches. Japanese companies like Taito and Namco were making games that sometimes surpassed Atari's in sales, thus enshrining Japan as a major player in the industry. Smaller firms like Stern Electronics, Williams Electronics, Konami, Data East, and Gottlieb found success by offering creative spins on established formulas, and sometimes by creating entirely new genres all their own. Seemingly everyone was getting in on video games. Multinational conglomerates like Mattel were experimenting with portable, handheld devices, as were small-time upstarts like the Japanese playing card company Nintendo. Atari dominated the home market with its 2600, but there was no shortage of competing systems. Mattel's Intellivision, Coleco's ColecoVision, the Vectrex, the Astrocade, the Magnavox Odyssey 2. 1983 was a good year to be in the video game business. Until it wasn't. In the final fiscal quarter of 1982, Warner Communications announced that sales of Atari products had fallen slightly short of expectations. This caused the company's stock value to plummet by 32%. Sales continued to decline, and within a year, Atari had gone from earning $2 billion a year in revenue to being $500 million in debt. Atari's collapse dragged down many other companies, with most who had dipped their toes into video games quickly abandoning them. Pretty much everyone who had profited off video games began to lose money, from Wall Street brokers and venture capitalists to mom-and-pop retailers and the owners of small arcades. By 1984, video games were finished, and most dismissed them as nothing more than a passing fad whose time had come to an end. What caused the market to collapse so suddenly and catastrophically is multifaceted. While the disastrous performance of Atari's movie tie-in E.T. the Extraterrestrial is often cited as a catalyst, that particular game was more a symptom than a cause of the industry's decline. The chain of events that led to Atari's downfall arguably began in 1979, with the formation of the world's first third-party game developer, Activision. Activision was founded when 4 Atari engineers, David Crane, Larry Kaplan, Alan Miller, and Bob Whitehead, set out to make a company of their own. Ray Kassar, the Warner-appointed CEO of Atari, who had taken over from Nolan Bushnell, had released a memo explaining how much money Atari made over the past year. The 4 engineers in question examined this memo and realized that the games they made were responsible for around 60% of Atari's profits. But they did not see a cut of these profits. They were not paid royalties for their work, nor were they given a percentage of sales. They did not even receive bonuses when they made a game that sold well. Instead, each of them was paid a fairly modest salary regardless of performance. They didn't make that much more than the janitors and security guards. The inequitable treatment did not stop there. At the time, most video games were entirely the product of a single person. Engineers like Crane and Whitehead not only wrote the code, they came up with the concepts, the gameplay, the art design, the sound, everything. Yet despite all that, they were not credited for their creations. You won't find their names anywhere on the packaging. Every game these engineers produced was simply credited as a product of Atari Incorporated Consumer Division. As Yahtzee Croshaw put it, Warner felt that giving credit to game developers made about as much sense as giving credit to office furniture. It was this lack of accreditation that led to the invention of the video game Easter egg. For those who don't know, an Easter egg is an optional piece of content hidden within a game, usually one that serves no gameplay purpose but acknowledges the efforts of particularly explorative gamers. The first known instance of this was 1980's Adventure, created by Atari engineer Warren Robinette. Adventure is an early dungeon crawler, tasking players with maneuvering between a series of chambers as they collect items and avoid monsters. Through a very elaborate series of actions, players can discover a secret room that contains a few lines of flashing text, created by Warren Robinette. Robinette made accessing this room intentionally difficult, so that his bosses would not know about it until after the game had shipped. Atari started as a very free and open company. Employees were given few restrictions and could pretty much do as they pleased so long as they made good games. Bushnell carried himself more like a new age guru than a businessman. He hosted creative retreats where both ideas and alcohol flowed freely. He held staff meetings in his hot tub. Supposedly, he once pulled out a joint in front of Ray Kassar just to piss him off. Bushnell had few rules, but one he enforced with vigor was that everybody, regardless of position or salary, treated each other as equals. This was not how Warner Communications did things. Upon purchasing the company, Warner installed Ray Kassar as CEO. Kassar, an old-school businessman from New York City, had previously served as the vice president of a textile company, Burlington Industries. Upon taking over at Atari, Kassar tried to ingratiate himself to his new employees, but his attempts to seem relatable backfired. Upon introducing himself to Atari's senior engineers, he said something to the effect of, "I respect designers. I used to work with them all the time at my old job." To which most of the engineers rolled their eyes and said, "He's talking about people who design dish rags." Kassar did not run Atari the way Bushnell had. Under him, things became much more stratified, much more corporate. Instead of everyone freely mingling with each other, Kassar set up an executive dining room where he and the other managers could eat lunch away from the people they supervised. Kassar also stipulated in his contract that he be provided with a personal driver to chauffeur him to and from work. Kassar defended this stipulation by saying he didn't feel safe driving in Bay Area traffic. As someone who lives in the Bay Area, I can attest that this is not an entirely unreasonable thing to say. Yet the biggest change Kassar brought was a shift in priorities. Under Bushnell, Atari had been engineering-driven. It was a technology company that viewed coming up with new inventions as its main goal. Kassar ran it like a business. Technological advancement was all well and good, but the real goal was to make money. Kassar spent astronomically more on marketing and sales than Bushnell ever had. In an interview with Al Alcorn, he said that he and Bushnell would have just focused on making a new console. They never would have even considered spending $100 million a year on advertising. But Ray Kassar did. Alcorn gives Kassar credit for shaping Atari into what it became. It never would have become the behemoth it did without someone like Kassar at the helm, and his efforts to make Atari the biggest thing in entertainment unquestionably helped bring video games to the forefront of popular culture. In that respect, virtually every person who makes or consumes video games owes Ray Kassar a debt of gratitude. Yet this approach, ultimately, was short-sighted. In lavishing so much attention on sales and marketing, Kassar largely ignored, and in many ways mistreated, his engineering staff, the people who actually made the products that Atari sold. In 1979, Crane, Kaplan, Miller, and Whitehead approached their boss, demanding they be given equitable treatment for their role as Atari's most productive employees. They were the rock stars of the video game industry, and wanted to be treated the way record labels treated actual rock stars, by giving them credit on albums and giving them a cut of all profits. Kassar was unreceptive to these demands. He seemed to genuinely believe that there was no artistry or even particular talent when it came to making video games. Anybody can do a cartridge, he allegedly said. Later, in a newspaper interview, Kassar publicly called his own employees high-strung prima donnas. This was the final straw. Crane, Miller, Kaplan, and Whitehead quit and founded their own company, Activision. Keeping with their rock star ethos, they hired an actual music executive, Jim Levi, to be their money man. The name Activision was chosen as a portmanteau of the words active and television. It was also chosen because it would appear ahead of Atari in alphabetical listings, something another former Atari employee, Steve Jobs, would do with his company as well. Ray Kassar is often cast as a villain in the history of video games, the first in a long line of money-grubbing executives who treated the passionate, creative designers under his employ like dirt, and in the end tanked his own company as a result. This may be a harsh characterization, but in Kassar's case I do not believe it is unfair. Remember that video games largely originated in the hacker clubs of MIT, that the men who programmed Space War freely shared their code with whoever wanted it. Bushnell, the long-haired hippie who let his employees smoke pot at their desks, was viewed by the likes of Bill Pitts as a ruthless businessman, and comparatively speaking, he was. Video games did not start as a money-making endeavor. The people who made, and who make, video games are not motivated by profit. They do what they do because they love it. And if I may be so bold, the ones who do treat video games like a business, who feel they can compromise on quality in exchange for profits, always seem to fail in the end. While those who make games from a genuine sense of passion find not only commercial, but cultural success as well. I will end this section by letting Ray Kassar explain himself in his own words.
The reason I'm doing this interview is because I don't feel that in the past, people who've done stories or films about Atari have spoken to enough of our marketing people. Now, you have to have a balance in business. Without product and engineers, there'd be no marketing. But at Atari, there was a very strong engineering influence in the company that preceded me. And all I say is I think to get a true balanced picture of what happened at Atari, we need to speak to engineers, marketing people, financial people, manufacturing people to get the balance. The balance is important.
Activision began, as so many tech companies have, in a garage in Silicon Valley. This garage, belonging to David Crane, saw the development of Activision's first 4 games, each one the product of a different engineer. Bob Whitehead's Boxing, Alan Miller's Checkers, Larry Kaplan's Bridge, and David Crane's Dragster. Unlike Atari's games, Activision's featured the programmer's name prominently on the front of the cartridge, and the manual had an entire page devoted to them, wherein they provided tips and tricks on how to win. Furthermore, the box art tended to be more honest than Atari's. Most of Atari's cartridges up to that point featured elaborate box art painted by artist Cliff Spawn, and these images, while doing a good job of selling the game, were not especially reflective of the actual gameplay. Activision, by contrast, featured box art that was simpler and more accurately expressed the game within. The back of the box also featured an actual screenshot, ensuring that players got an honest preview of what they were buying. Activision also fostered a sense of community. They reached out to gamers to make them feel like more than mere consumers. Prior to 1983, Activision ran an open contest wherein players who made certain achievements within their games could mail in photographic evidence of these achievements and in turn be sent a sewn-in patch commemorating what they did. This unquestionably influenced the trophies and achievements of the modern age. Activision found success quickly, and needless to say, Ray Kassar was not happy. When Activision set up a booth at 1980's Consumer Electronics Show, CES, Kassar lambasted them in the media, claiming they had stolen trade secrets and were evil, terrible people. Atari sued Activision, and this case proved almost as pivotal for the industry as the lawsuit between Atari and Magnavox. In 1974, it had been decided that any company could make any type of video game they wanted, resulting in the subsequent glut of Pong clones. Now the question was whether or not any company could make a game for any system, even if the system's owner did not want them to. The answer, it turned out, was yes. Bushnell had never actually patented the Atari 2600. Neither had Warner. It was a difficult system to program for, and Atari simply assumed that no other company would try to make games for it, let alone a company made up of former Atari employees. Despite Atari's best efforts to shut Activision down, they could not demonstrate that any actual laws had been broken. The case was ultimately settled out of court, with Activision agreeing to pay a royalty on every cartridge sold, but otherwise being free to make games as they pleased. This meant that Activision could now make games for the 2600, as could anyone else who was so inclined.